you're probably leaning harder into FP&A or business partnering because you tend to have more complexity in certain pockets like supply chain, go-to-market, demand planning, those kind of things. So you need a finance person in those areas to really understand what's going on in the supply chain, kind of supplier by supplier. What are the terms? What were the inventory levels? How are we managing that data? So it's more about the fact that you have to map your finance team to the complexity of the company. And the company is generally a bit more complex when it comes to a hardware company. Then I think there are things which are different. Although, again, the thing I was about to say was project accounting. So obviously in a hardware company, you will have a product portfolio. There is a life cycle to that product, which is usually very different to your annual or cadence. So you will have a whole set of processes that revolve around the planning of that particular product, what you expect of that product during its lifetime, whatever its end of life is. And that might be a financial forecast that goes over maybe even like 3 to 5 years from beginning to end. And so your FP&A team is focusing a lot on that overall profitability of that product. In a hardware company, that's really important because you go through gates and you start making buying decisions for components quite early. So if you've got a launch volume you're planning towards, then the finance team needs to understand, okay, we're buying these components for that particular launch, and that might be 6 months ahead. So you're starting to think about your cash cycles.
Hi, team. Thanks so much for joining us today. Super excited to have you. I remember we first met at the equity dinner a couple of years ago, and we were discussing about the future of finance. You were at the time CFO of a company called Nothing, producing headphones. I see that you are in the this beautiful Nothing headphones today as well. At the time, so I really enjoyed our conversation. I thought that it would be great to bring it to our community as well, and ask you a few questions about sort of where the profession is going. What are the most exciting things in the space?
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, thank you so much for having me, Albert. It's really exciting to join the podcast, and happy to help however I can. And hopefully, my Nothing audio is sounding clear and crisp.
Yeah, it works perfectly well. Team, wanted to start with, so you, your background is you studied math and computer science, and then had an amazing journey in the world of finance. Just wanted to just get your story, how you ended up in finance, and what are you most excited about being in this profession?
So you're right. I started out right at my university. I did computer science degree or computer science and maths degree. And I guess there were two paths, right? I could have taken a technical route and gone on and been a coder or technical person. Or with my maths side, I decided that I wanted to go and do more of a business angle. And I think the reason for that was, to be honest, I was 21. It wasn't like I had some massive grand plan, but I think at the time what I quite fancied doing was moving to London. I got the opportunity to join PwC, having applied there at the university. And I saw it as an opportunity to do tech, but on the business side. And so that was really where it came from. It's just the idea of joining a firm like PwC, I worked in the technology team, so technology, media, communications team whilst I was there, only for 4 years. But yeah, so I joined them, and so I carried on doing tech at the same time as doing finance, and it worked really well actually. I think at the time, computer science wasn't exactly a really widespread degree. This was in the late 90s. There were a few degrees, but there weren't that many. And you wouldn't believe my computer science department was only about 50 people or something, whereas it's a bit bigger these days. And so I took that foundation and knowledge into the finance world, and I think it gave me a really interesting perspective and angle on the kind of clients that we were working with. So it worked pretty well from the early days.
So I know that we're planning to discuss a little bit more about the future of the finance, and so you're also experimenting on a couple of new products and technologies. So probably that computer science origin is helping you to think through how to bring innovation into the space as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I think, in every company I've been in, I've always had an advantage. Let's see, I don't know whether it's been an advantage because I haven't to compare against, but I've always felt like it was easy for me to understand what was going on inside those businesses because I had a bit of technical understanding from an engineering perspective. So I spent 11 years at Symbian, and obviously I wasn't 100% up to speed with exactly how the kernel worked and how the graphics worked, etc. But I had a rough idea of how software engineers build software products. And so from a finance side, it meant that I was speaking the same language when it came to understanding, what people needed, what resources they needed to achieve their objectives. And the same thing each step through the career, as I went from technology company to technology company. When I went into hardware at Arrival, again, similarly, and perhaps it was a combination of the software background and just a genuine kind of technical curiosity that allows you to talk to people and find out what's going on. I would say that over the 20 years or so of doing CFO roles, I pretty much lost all of my coding knowledge. But yeah, in the last 6 months or so, I've been refreshing myself on that. So that's been a really fun thing to do, especially, it's the ability to go and start coding Python. I became a graph database engineer kind of in the background. So these kind of new technologies, and it just gives you a different perspective on how things will change in the future as well, as you start to look into those kind of products and see what the opportunities are for running finance teams.
You also have this unique combination, not just being an engineer and a finance person, but also having experience working not just in the software businesses, but also in the hardware businesses. On our shows, we had most of the people who were mostly in the software businesses. So wanted to deep dive a little bit into what were your learnings and how do you sort of like fundamentally see the differences of the finance function in the hardware and the software businesses, and any learnings, any differences in terms of the approach?
It's not surprising most people have been from the software side, because in Europe, at least, it's a pretty rare breed of companies who are actually building hardware devices, particularly in technology. It's really different, but it's also kind of the same, right? It's an unhelpful kind of analogy. It's the fundamentals are all the same. The big difference between running a hardware company and a software company, and obviously there are different flavors of software company, some are more complex than others, but in general terms, there's just a higher level of complexity in hardware than there is in software. So the processes tend to be, more segregated. So rather than building a product, which you then have to release and then you can ship it out to all your customers, you have to build a product, you have to design a product, then you have to collect all the components, you have to manufacture them, then you have to store them and go through logistics, etc. And so that complexity is the thing that drives the finance team to do things slightly differently. That's the first thing. And I guess the other part of that complexity is timeline. So with a hardware company, you have to make many more decisions in advance of certainty than you do with software. So with software, you're spinning up a product, you're sending it out to subscribers, they're using it, etc. There's a lot less risk in terms of, you don't have to buy a certain amount of software just on the off chance that someone wants to buy it in 6 months' time. So I think there's complexity in terms of the data you generate in a company and what you need to manage to understand how it's performing. But there's also a lot of complexity in understanding how to plan for a hardware company and what the implications of the decisions you're going to make are.
So maybe just for us to understand, if you can tell a little bit more about how does your team look like at Nothing? So what were the main departments within the finance team? And so if you can share the differences when you were at the software, if there were any.
Yeah, I think in structurally, as I said, it's not like you really dive into different kind of overall structures. It's probably you're diving harder into certain areas. So I think, you still, in hardware or software, you need you need to do reporting, you need to do tax, you need to do accounts payable, accounts receivable, all that kind of stuff is the same. So kind of from a 10,000-foot view, the team looks the same. It's actually just where you focus your effort a bit more deeply. So I think in hardware companies generally, you're probably leaning harder into FP&A or business partnering, because you tend to have more complexity in certain pockets, like supply chain, like go-to-market, like kind of demand planning, those kind of things. So you need a finance person in those areas to really understand what's going on in the supply chain, kind of supplier by supplier. What are the terms? What were the inventory levels? How are we managing that data? So it's more about the fact that you have to map your finance team to the complexity of the company, and the company is generally a bit more complex when it comes to a hardware company. Then I think there are things which are probably which are different. Although again, as I think about the thing I was about to say was project accounting. So obviously in a hardware company, you will have a product portfolio. There is a life cycle to that product, which is usually very different to your kind of annual or quarterly cadence. So you will have a whole set of processes that revolve around the planning of that particular product, what you expect of that product during its lifetime, what its end of life is. And that might be a financial forecast that goes over, I don't know, maybe even like 3 to 5 years from beginning to end. And so your FP&A team is focusing a lot on that overall profitability of that product. In a hardware company, that's really important because you go through gates and you start making buying decisions for components quite early. So if you've got a launch volume you're planning towards, the finance team needs to understand, okay, we're buying these components for that particular launch, and that might be 6 months ahead. So you're starting to think about your cash cycles. In a software company, you should probably be planning on those product launches in a similar kind of way, although obviously if you're doing kind of regular releases, you don't do the planning in quite the same way. At a slightly higher level and with slightly less kind of really crunchy implications if you get it wrong, right? So you have, with a hardware company, if I'm going to buy a whole load of components for a particular product on a particular day, I better be pretty sure we're going to build those into components and then sell them. Otherwise, you've got all that inventory risk. So it comes down again to kind of risks and timelines, and the structure of the team you build is really to reflect those risks and those timelines in the team and the effort you're putting in to make sure you're getting the information for those products.
There's additional requirements on the capital and working capital in the hardware business. How did that change your view in terms of the capital structures as well, specifically equity versus debt financing?
I mean, it's an interesting one. There's a lot of thought about what types of capital are the right things for certain types of activities. I've mostly worked in SMEs and kind of smaller companies. Obviously, we've grown up to be pretty big in a few cases. So it does really depend on where you are in your maturity, what options you have, right? You can't just say as a 6-month-old startup who wants to do a hardware product, you can't say, right, we're going to go and get a bank loan, because they're not going to give you one, because so there are conditions for debt which are quite stringent, and lenders tend to look at the fundamentals of the business very early on, and so you'll get no's. Your options on debt will reduce pretty quickly. So it's not like you have a free rein to decide on your entire capital structure. I think the way that I've always done it is to kind of assess what kind of options we have for raising money. Normally in a startup, you've got equity as your primary focus, because that's where you've got yourself kicked off from. So you've got early seed raise or pre-seed, and you go through Series A, etc. But as you get through, and once you reach this other point where you start to become a bit more mature, then you can start thinking about debt and then layering that in. And I think the other thing to say about the kind of debt equity choice is that equity is perhaps slightly more boilerplate depending on where you are. So it's pretty much the same, but debt comes in a 1,000 different forms. So you can't really think about invoice factoring in the same way as you think about venture debt, in the same way as you think about a bank loan. So those different types of debt also layer into your capital structure in a different kind of way. So I think going back to the kind of hardware versus software thing, obviously the working capital you need for a hardware company, that it's ideally you would have all of that funded by debt, because it's a short-term working capital flow. It's a short-term financing requirement. You don't want to be going out and getting long-term equity financing for these short-term flows. Having said that, at an earlier stage, you quite often don't have the choice, because the debt companies don't want to lend to kind of very new companies that have losses and haven't got gross margins. The key is therefore to talk to those guys, understand what their requirements are, so that you know that when you hit that moment that you can go and get debt, then you're able to go, you understand what your options are. They've already got a bit of a relationship with you, so you start to build it up so you have that option built over time.
You mentioned that hardware companies are a rare breed here in Europe. Why do you think so? Especially in the context of Europe traditionally was strong in terms of the hardware, right? So great cars and a lot of great hardware companies from before, but it seems like in the new generation of companies, it's becoming harder. Being inside one of the most exciting hardware companies. So what were your learnings? Why is that?
I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but hardware is hard, right? You have to. It's not straightforward. So it stands to reason that when you have even a really what I see to be a really burgeoning startup economy, lots of people kind of had loads of different ideas, and obviously AI is supercharging the ability for people to set up new businesses. There is a set of really kind of rare skills you need, a combination of rare skills you need to be able to set up a hardware business and be successful at it. And if I take nothing as an example, if you think about the combination of, yes, you have to have really great design, you have to understand, what do your customers want, and then how to engineer those products. But then there's a whole range of frankly rather less kind of sexy skills, which are needed to get the business up and running. So it's one thing to be able to design and build a cool pair of headphones. But can you build the business structure that you need to be able to sell that into channel, get those channels to sell into retail, get customers to use the products, and then support those customers? So when someone buys one of your headphones in Dubai, then flies back to Brazil, and it goes wrong, and they call in and want service, then what are you going to do about that? It's, especially when you're selling at a high volume, it starts to get really messy really quickly. So one of the reasons why it's hard to do hardware is because it's complex. It's, as I said several times, and you need to be able to draw. You need to understand even what the skill sets you need are to be successful in it, even before you can really start and get going. And I think investors understand that. Right? Investors, when we were going fundraising for hardware companies, you can pretty much draw your long list and then kind of strike out maybe 50, 60, 70% of them because the hardware is in their strategy. And the reason for that is because they see the risks and they see the complexities of it. I think, then you get specialist investors who really understand the business, who can add value, and who they kind of get it and they understand the opportunities if you get it right. Because it does make for a really nice, if you can get a good brand going and you can get good brand loyalty and build all that structure, then you can build a fantastic business. But yeah, it's tough. So that's probably the reason why there aren't so many of them around.
I know that you're very opinionated about the products. And during our first meeting, you were showing me all the cool features in the new Nothing phone. Mm-hmm. Just accidentally, the last weekend, I just watched the movie about the BlackBerry, about research in motion.
Okay.
And then their quick raise and also their iPhone moment when basically they lost most of their market share. I think they had like 45% of the market share of the phones, and it went down to the zero. I think a lot of people are complaining about the Apple these days. Do you think like what's that Apple moment for Apple? Do you think we'll see new players in this space?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I was at Symbian for 10 years or 11 years actually, from 2000 to 2011. So we were the software, the operating system was inside Nokia phones, and so we were on that ride a lot, kind of parallel to BlackBerry, and maybe even a little bit more heavily impacted by Apple's success. And I think, yeah, it's funny looking back. My recollection of that period was there wasn't so much of an iPhone moment as a kind of iPhone period, right? It's iPhone got launched, and everyone was a bit, this looks pretty good. But then what happened was we all started picking holes in it and saying, yeah, but the big one was always iPhone can't do copy and paste. It's like not really realizing people didn't seem to care about copy and paste because they're all excitingly doing their kinetic scrolling. But you're asking, is there an iPhone moment for Apple now? I suspect not, right? I think, Apple has its place in the market. They do a really great job of design. They've got huge customer loyalty. I think, they're in a very strongly protected position, and they can, as they've shown in the last few weeks, they can, if they have a problem, they can kind of buy their way out of it. I'm probably more cynical about some of the other things they've tried to do, like the kind of their XR strategy in terms of the goggles and stuff. But I think, from a phone's perspective, they've got a pretty solid position, and that I think is fine for the rest of the market, right? There's plenty of space around them. If you look at certain geographies, Apple doesn't sell massively in India. It doesn't sell a lot, outside of its core market. It does sell a lot, but it's not so present in all the markets that there isn't plenty of market share to go around. But I think that what that means is there is opportunity for people to innovate in and around them in that market, and that's where companies like Nothing can be successful, right?
Yeah, I would love to test out more of the Nothing products because I heard great feedback on them.
Yeah.
Maybe switching the gears a little bit towards the building the teams, building the finance teams. And I think one angle I wanted to use here is like everything is changing. in today's world with with this phenomenal technology that we are seeing with AI. And I think probably the way teams will be structured will be different as well, including the finance teams. So wanted to just like hypothetically discuss with you, if you were to build finance team at a company like nothing from scratch today, how would you approach that? What type of skills you would be looking for, and what type of functional skills you will be also adding to your teams?
I actually don't see a difference in finance today to how it has always been, really. I think if I was building for nothing from today or for any startup from today, you still look for your first hire to be a kind of really competent generalist. So someone who can come in and help you to do the transactional stuff as well as the kind of more strategic or planning types of activities. And that's because you're still using spreadsheets and you're still using documents to build the models and to build your plans and budgets and everything else. And you're probably still using Xero as your finance system, and you might be using surrounding systems like Expensify and stuff. But generally, it's going to be a classic SME best in class tied together with a human being kind of approach. I would say as a CFO, it's super frustrating because, especially having spent the last 6 months or so, building products with AI, etc., the opportunities to replace a bunch of those processes with automation is huge. But I don't see the tools at the moment that are able to do it, because the market seems to be taking the approach of using AI to solve the problems that exist in the current tech stack rather than replacing the tech stack itself, which is what actually needs to happen. So I think for now, it's exactly as it always was. And it's interesting, obviously, talk to quite a few CFOs about AI and how they're planning to use AI, and the fact that they've got, the sort of terrifying idea of CFOs having used more AI in their OKRs for the kind of next quarter or whatever, because all it does is kind of drive them to give everyone ChatGPT Pro subscriptions, which means they get a lot of really plausible looking reports. So I think, like I said, right now, I don't see a change. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, then this will get solved a bit. So there are going to be platforms going forward that actually use AI to really dig into the guts of the system and can do things like replace the need. It's really the spreadsheets you've got to work out how to replace, right? It's your forecasting, it's your forecast, your model, your management accounts, your financial statements, all those kind of things. If they are inside a system that can be read by AI, then suddenly AI has the power of knowledge of your business, and that's where it really gets supercharged and actually delivers real value. So I think I can see in if I was building a team in 3 to 5 years, I probably would still have some of the same people there, but perhaps what you do is you do less as you grow. You do less transition from generalists to experts, because you can leave some of the expertise or the expert, what I call the kind of expert admin. So building the report that you send to your tax advisor, that kind of stuff can be done by an AI that understands your business.
Would you look for some skills related to learning new things, or maybe some AI literacy as well? So, for instance, recently Meta changed the way they interview product managers. So they have tasks where the product managers during the interview using AI, and they're seeing how they interact and how they doing the prompts. It seems like the skill is becoming super important, at least sort of like on the product side of the things. Curious, sort of like, would you do something similar in the finance function?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think the finance function you've got to maintain so much trust and kind of accuracy in the data that you produce that it's really hard to work out how to have someone who comes in and applies kind of an AI approach to that. I think more likely what I would do, the thing that I have seen actually in some companies, and that perhaps the approach I would take would be to hire in some developers and build a bespoke AI system for the particular company, rather than try and build in a system. So instead of hiring someone who's going to build me a big spreadsheet model, perhaps I hire some software engineers to build me a software model that can then be read by AI. So those kind of things is where I've heard of companies really leveraging AI in their back office. They tend at the moment, I think, to be building bespoke solutions. but it's a bit risky because you end up spending a lot of money and you perhaps don't end up with as good a system as you get just having humans in your legacy technology. So that might be a way forward. I think in terms of people who have skill sets of using AI, it's kind of table stakes, right? Doesn't everyone have to have that? Certainly, I mean, maybe everything from middle layers upwards, people need to be able to understand how to operate with AI as a kind of daily driver. So maybe that isn't special anymore as a skill.
So basically, very much sort of like the same fundamental skills that you're looking for, starting with a generalist. How would you sort of like just as a company matures, build out other functions as well? Like what? Like what would be the progression of the function?
Yeah. So as you build, I mean, you start off, very greenfield with a generalist to help you out. So in the smaller companies that I've been running, two or three of us in total, including me and the finance teams, works pretty well up to a certain level. The approach, I mean, I guess one of the things when I've worked now in, I don't know, so like 6 or 7 different companies, built 6 or 7 different teams. So you start to get to a place where you have a preferred way of working. And I don't actually know whether that is a standard way of working. I guess it is, because people don't kind of look at me quizzically when I start trying to hire roles. But the way that I tend to do things is I'll have a team, what I call a finance manager or controllership team, who's looking after all the data. So systems and data. So this is the team that includes the accounts payable, accounts receivable, and all of the kind of monthly reconciliations, that kind of stuff, doing month end, etc. So you would, again, start out at a high level and then build an assistance for that person to do more APAR and build the underlying general ledger system. And then on the side of that, you'll have your FP&A team or strategic finance team, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes they kind of edge into business partnering, depending on how close you put them to the business or how far away. But there's basically a team of people who are your kind of data intelligence team. So understanding what's happening in the business and how to interpret the data that the data team is coming up with. And that's usually enough for a while because you have external people helping you out. And then later on, if I think about the team that we started building at Arrival towards the end, you then start building your expert team. So you have kind of expert specialists. You go away from your generalist roles and you build a tax team, you build a control team, you build a reporting team, you build a treasury team. So those people with specialist skills that allow you to kind of offboard some of your, probably usually things out of your CFO kind of bandwidth. You get to offboard some of those things onto other teams, and you get to the point where, as a CFO, you're really just kind of holding the strings of things together rather than actually operating much on a daily basis, which is always a bit sad.
And thinking about 5, maybe 10 years ahead, let's imagine that finance teams have the superpowers where we don't spend time anymore on closing the books. Forecasting and planning comes with a push of the button automatically. With all of the superpowers, where do you think is the potential? So like what sort of like, now you have this big release of the time, what teams can do at that time? What could be unlocked when we get to that?
Maybe it's my personal view is that these systems and tools will assist us rather than replace us, right? So I don't think they will assist us in doing what we do, but I can't see I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I can't see a time where even if you think about accounts payable or accounts receivable, in the end you're going to have someone who is able to take responsibility for having a conversation with a third party about when they're going to get paid or when they're going to be paid. And so I think what you start to see is those teams becoming much more efficient because you're injecting mistakes into the system. A lot of the issues, and I know you know this from your company, right? A lot of the issues we get, why do you do month end at all? It's all about the fact you're making mistakes every day through the month, either genuine errors from people just making mistakes, or things going in at the wrong time, or not going in at all, going the wrong way around, or wrong currency, etc. So all of those mistakes you make are the thing that gives you the body of work to do on a monthly basis, and the reason why we haven't already gone to reporting. So I think you become much more productive. Your time is much more efficient. So you can have one person who can be just constantly calling the suppliers or constantly calling the customers, rather than constantly do reconciliations and trying to work out where to put this number in this big table of numbers. I think you end up having fewer people, but still doing somewhat the same roles, but much more effectively. And then I think the other side of it is, so you have that, probably it's an efficiency boost from having the same person doing a lot more. And then you have a productivity boost from the fact that the system, as a result of the improved quality of data, can feed information much better to the person to help them to do their job. So if you think about the data quality coming to an FP&A person, they don't have to go away and do a whole lot of spreadsheet cleaning to work out, what is the total cost of my staff base or my cost of my employee base, right? For example, they just ask the question and the report comes back. So you can start to be much more productive in your work by having access to that information. So I think that's really where it goes to. I would expect finance teams. I mean, who knows? They might be smaller or they might be bigger. You might find more things to do. I think that you will find an AI system, if it has access to that high quality data source, yes, improves efficiency, improves productivity, and probably also makes the overall business a bit more robust because it will be able to kind of do forward planning, that kind of stuff. But always with a human in control. I don't see people wanting to be removed from the loop altogether. Otherwise, what's the business for?
Yeah, I find that it's so interesting that finance really sits at intersection of different data flows inside the company. And there's this huge potential of driving insights and intelligence of that data. But in today's world, if anyone has a question that requires data analysis, it's usually sort of like becomes a project where someone just trying to get, like insights, and then it takes time, it's expensive. And so sometimes, like a lot of decisions are not really sort of like taking into account that data as well. And there's a huge opportunity on just making those insights instant and improving decision making and improving overall quality of direction where the company is going.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's not just finance though. It's all the way across the kind of back office of the business. So if you think about when you're building a financial forecast, a lot of the information comes from your legal data set. So when I'm building if I have a bill of materials for a product and I'm building a cash flow forecast from that, so with different components, what's the payment period for each of these items? All of the information that I need is inside the contracts that I have with the supply chain partners. But right now, what I have to do is either go and ask the supply chain team, or I have to go and read the contract myself, or because contracting is a really, forgive me, dumb process at the moment. You write a contract, you spend a lot of money drafting a contract, signing a contract, and you kind of put it away. And let's hope we never have to read that again. But of course, all that information is gold dust for financial reporting. So those kind of things, I think, yes, what you're describing is great, and building that kind of finance angle on the way that data will be accessed is great. But if you can do cross context as well, so legal and finance and people, and I guess also past, present, and future, those different contexts, and mixing the context between when you're querying and getting that data fast is going to be really. It's one of those ones where you're not going to know how useful it's going to be until you've got it, and suddenly it'll be like, wow, that's incredible. If you can imagine doing a cash flow review with your treasury or your AP team, and you're able to instantly look at a downturn in cash and say, who are we paying and what are the credit terms of that from the contract? Rather than, if you asked your AP team, normally they'd be like, I don't know, don't ask the legal team or the supply chain team. But if the system has all that information embedded in it as well, then you suddenly get very fast actions, and you're able to start being much more proactive about managing things, making decisions faster.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the tech stack for the finance teams. I know that you have a lot of interesting thoughts in this area. The angle there is, imagine I am a CFO of manufacturing hardware company. My core system of the record is SAP ERP or something similar. I have a lot of legacy systems in place as well. And just coming out of the meeting with the board, that's sort of like asking, hey, what's your AI strategy? What are you doing with the team? My team is like 100 people. Where to start? So which workflows do you think you should automate first? How you recommend doing that? And also what are the decisions that need to be made? Should I just change my ERP and go in this like multi-year project, or because like there are some new ones that promising a lot in this space? Just like curious, like what would you advise to people?
Yeah, I mean, if that was me, I think the place that I would go is the place where I have no structured system at the moment. And most likely, unless you've bought in one of these kind of forecasting tools like Anaplan or Abacum or whatever, then you're likely to be doing most of your budgeting and forecasting in spreadsheets. That's the place where I would go to start, because the systemic spreadsheets in your system are the point of kind of worst control, if you like. That's where your biggest risk is. If you're using an ERP, even if it's as badly set up as most of them are, then at least it's better controlled from a data perspective than the spreadsheets you're operating. So I think that's the place where you would start. Is you basically say, where are my real weak spots, and perhaps I can start there. Then I think the next thing you can do is you can start to understand where is data moving between different systems. So inevitably, even an ERP, there's very few ERPs that are kind of true ERPs that have all of your data. So there's always some data transfer process that's going on, or some API that's being used. So injecting a new system or an AI system into that to help you to reduce the time frame of reduce the time that your current team is spending on doing that interface is probably the next thing to do. And I mean, most finance teams, if you ask them, and why does it take you 15 days to close month end? It'll be because we spent 2 days doing this thing. We have to download a CSV and then clean it and then upload it again. So those kind of things are the places where you go next. And I don't think you would even think about changing your ERP, because right now I don't think there is an AI ERP that you can choose. And you're definitely not going to throw away SAP and do that. It's sadly kind of too late for you, because you've probably also spent $1 million on deploying your SAP system and training up your entire team on using it, etc. That's probably it for now, right? I mean, until you get to the point where there is an alternative which you can genuinely go to, which is next generation, you're kind of stuck. But for smaller companies, it's different though, right? So as I said before, the tech stack that you're deploying as an SME is most likely going to be some version of Xero or QuickBooks or something, probably lots of different instances of that, tied together with spreadsheet consolidation or a consolidation tool. I think there are opportunities and there are new entrants into the market. I have to say I'm not super familiar. I've seen a couple of them which purport to be AI native, although I would say every system that I've seen in the last 3 years tells me that they are AI first or AI native, and they definitely aren't. So you've got to be careful of that. Just having an AI chatbot on top doesn't make you AI native. So yeah, I think for SMEs, there's probably more flexibility because you haven't already done the big investment in an ERP. But for companies that have already gone to SAP or NetSuite, then it's a case of trying to work out how you can try to make that as efficient as possible, I suppose.
And where should those finance leaders, where should they start? Because this is the question that we're getting all the time. Shall I build something in house? Get engineering team for that? Should I hire some transformation leaders inside the company to do that, or work with external vendors as well? So usually, oftentimes, many companies don't have this expertise internally, and also don't have really time to just go and do it themselves, learn some of these new skills. So where should they start?
What we've done in previous companies is always move towards having a business systems team inside the company once you reach a certain scale. And I think if you think about it, if you've reached the scale where you've bought a NetSuite or an SAP, you're spending enough money on that it makes sense to have an internal team that has the custodianship of that system. And so by doing that, what you end up with is a person who is expert in data management, that understands how to understand your data scenario, where the data is stored, what the different systems are, and to build a strategy. And this is no different, I don't think, to any other business strategy. You have to understand, where am I now? Where do I want to get to? And then the path in between it is what you need to do, right? So you hire someone who understands how to build out that kind of current state of the nation view, and can work through all the different opportunities and possibilities. And also, what's the cost benefit of doing this stuff? It might be fine to carry on doing whatever you're doing. It's really about understanding what's the benefit of doing it. I certainly wouldn't go down a path of kind of building a bespoke AI tool for the business without knowing exactly why I was doing that and understanding what I was going to get out at the other end of it.
What's your decision making on buy versus build? So the other day we were talking with the CFO of one large AI company, and they were saying that, hey, just like we're building all these agents in-house, they already, like my AR is fully automated. So halfway through automating, 20 other things with the agents. And then in the room, I also had questions from other CFOs. Just, hey, we just tried to do it in-house. And every time we ask the question, AI gives like 3 different answers to the same question. So
yeah, exactly.
How do you approach this?
I would be super cautious about build unless you really know what you're doing. I mean, for this kind of stuff. And the reason being that it's all very well. It's a bit like what I was saying about giving everyone ChatGPT subscriptions. It's all very well doing a thing in the moment, but then you've got to work out how to maintain that and keep it working in the medium term. And I think unless you know what you're doing, they're quite likely to make mistakes that are hard to maintain, hard to support. You never know when that one person, and we've all had it actually. Everyone's got this experience with spreadsheets, right? Everyone's had an experience working in a finance team, or if you've worked in a few finance teams, where some guy built an impenetrable spreadsheet and then left, and then everyone's like, I have no idea how this spreadsheet works. No one knows how to work this thing. It's 10,000 lines of spreadsheet. And so it's, that's probably like 10 or 5, 10, 15 years ago problem. The new problem for that is someone who builds an AI system using Lovable or some kind of code generator. And even that person in this case doesn't understand how it works. So I guess, maybe that's too negative because you can then use an AI to go and find out how it works or how it operates. But I think you're probably injecting a bit of risk into your business that you don't need to when you can go and find other tools. My personal preference would always be to go and find a supplier of a system that I can adopt, and I'd rather try and work around their version of best practice for the specific thing that I'm doing, than hiring a transformation person who's going to build me a bespoke product or kind of customize a product to my particular requirements. Because I just think that that admin burden or that maintenance burden of trying to work out how to make changes going forward, all that kind of stuff is always very painful. I can think about NetSuite implementations I've worked with where, you've got a report and you want to make a slight change to the report, or especially in fast growing businesses where the focus can change quite quickly. And so you go from like a product focus to a region focus or something like that. You want to look at things differently, and then you're having to pay lots more consultants to come in again and make those new reports for you. It's pretty painful.
I know that in the last couple of months, you're very actively experimenting with AI on a few products and trying to build yourself different functionality. What were the key learnings, and what would you recommend for the people who are actually just like trying to learn how to vibe code or just build like any system inside the finance?
The first learning is I did a Python course and a Neo4j graph course before I started. So I kind of chose those technologies as things I wanted to use. I think had I not done that, then when I'm using AI to help me with the coding, then you really are talking to a system that speaks a different language. So you have to understand what code is being generated in order. This is my experience, right? Other people do it differently, but the way that I've been doing it is really using AI to help me draft code that I then inject into my own system, because I wanted to make sure that I always understood what was going on. So I didn't, because you can build a development environment, you can put AI into it and say, do this thing, and then it writes you like 10,000 lines of code, but you've got no idea what's going on. It gets completely out of control, spends loads of tokens, etc. So I much prefer a kind of slightly slower vibe coding approach of really understanding exactly what's being built. And that means you have to educate yourself on how to read the code, and you have to educate yourself on how to debug it, etc. So I think that's how I approach the problem. Even with that approach, you still there's a process that I call vibe decoding, which is where you realize that the AI has kind of taken you on a path that you didn't really want to go on, and then you have to work out how to use the AI to remove code so you get back to the place you wanted to be. It's kind of constant iteration, and I think this is kind of very normal, classic approach to product development, right? You go down paths, you try things, and you find that they're slightly different, and then you have to refactor and start again. So yeah, I mean, I should say I've been playing with it, trying to build a proof of concept, but it's a very impressively powerful tool to do it. And you can take a 25-year CFO with a Python project and maybe into someone who can build a system, kind of. It's been fun.
How many hours you spend until you felt more comfortable and just like felt that things are going, you can control the output?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I haven't been doing it full time, but I guess probably a few weeks. Or a few weeks. So the Python course I did was a total of a couple of weeks, I think, in terms of hours. I just did that over the summer, and then yeah. By the time, but I think the nice thing about it is it's a bit like learning a foreign language, and you learn a foreign language from a book, and then you go and speak a foreign language with the foreign language speaker. You obviously go very much faster up the curve of understanding than you do otherwise. So in a way, that the equivalent is when you do the Python course, that's kind of learning from a book or learning from an exercise or whatever, and then the vibe coding is actually the kind of live conversation about stuff, because you're talking to someone who's a natural language speaker of that code. So that's how I describe it. The more you do, the more you understand. And
yeah, what are the tools you're using?
Well, I've been using ChatGPT 5 and VS Code, and then and like I said, Neo4j is a graph database.
Yeah, so maybe just like a few quick fire questions to close out.
Mm-hmm.
If you hadn't got into the finance, what would you be doing instead?
Ooh.
I kind of probably know the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been a tech person of some kind. I mean, I would have loved, specifically, I would have loved to have found my way into the kind of late 90s UK gaming tech or gaming development scene. I mean, that would have been a dream to work alongside some of those guys. So that's, yeah, if I had my dream other career, I mean, I think I've been very lucky, right? So I've had such a fun time doing the jobs I've done. But if I had my dream job, then maybe I would have been coding some slightly kind of sarcastic computer game back in the 90s.
If you could meet anyone, past, present, who would that be?
Oh, wow. Meet anyone. So many people. Okay, here's a cheat. Can I meet a fictional person?
Of course.
Okay, I'll meet Doc Brown from the Back to the Future series, and
Wow.
I'll ask him what the design for the flux capacitor is, and then I can meet everyone. So I'm a bit of a this is that cheesy, but I'm a bit of a history buff, so I would love to go back to ancient Greece and chat with Archimedes, and then go to the Middle Ages and see how life was lived. It's super interesting how life was lived in different eras, and thinking about how different things are. So yeah, I'll steal Doc Brown's flux capacitor and have lots of tries.
That's the trick whenever you ask this question for someone who is like mathematician or coming from computer science background. They always just like cheat and
we always cheat.
Yeah, figure out how to just hack the system.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. So what's the last one? What's the last thing you would recommend for any finance leaders or anyone who is in finance these days? What would you recommend?
The thing that I've learned from doing this for a long time is just not to panic. Don't panic is the advice, and don't get too stressed about stuff. Things work out, and actually, if you get stressed about stuff, you never find as good a solution as if you try to look at things from a calm perspective. Because particularly in startup finance, things can get quite hairy sometimes, and you're in charge of stuff which is pretty heavy, and you worry a lot about the businesses you operate in and how things are going, and it can get very stressful. But you have to learn to remove yourself from the situation and make decisions with clarity. So yeah, don't panic. Just take a chill, go for a walk, and then come back and look at the problem again. And it usually looks better when you look at it in that way.
Yeah, I guess that works for everything. Thanks so much.
Yeah, pretty much.
Thanks so much for coming. And I know that there are a few exciting things going on in the background for you. Looking forward to hear more about them. And good luck with everything. Thanks so much for sharing your insights.
Cool. Thanks, Albert. And watch this space. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.